Welcome to Community Cafe, where strangers become new friends. New friends become old friends, and old friends become family. Please join our table or take a seat at the counter. We're glad you came. That deft orchestration of absurdity and existential dread distinguishes Ciment's style. That's why the situation of Ciment's latest novel, The Body in Question, is so perfectly suited to her powers as a novelist. She's writing here about jurors, bored, drowsy, horny jurors, sequestered together as they serve on the court a gruesome high-profile murder case in Central Florida. The droll and horrifying mingle in the flat air of the courtroom and the limbo of the jurors' language. All this could be the stuff of melodrama, but Ciment's incisive language turns The Body in Question into a profound story about morality and the mysteries of human behavior. By the trial's end, we're told that Hannah and the other jurors have run out of small talk and can no longer abide one another's company without alcohol. But as a reader, I happily could have been sequestered for a while longer within the confines of Ciment's smart and disturbing novel. She was born in Montreal, Quebec. She has studied art at the California Institute of Arts. She earned her BFA from Cal Arts in '75. She received her MFA in creative writing from the University of California, Irvine in 1981. Jill Ciment is one of those just under the radar writers. Probably her biggest moment of popular recognition came a few years ago when her novel, Heroic Measures, was made into a film called Five Flights Up. It stars Diane Keaton and Morgan Freeman as a married couple living in New York City who struggle to get their elderly dog to the vet in the midst of a terror alert. They wind up carrying the dog on a cutting board through a panicked city. You're listening to Society Bites Radio, and I'm your host, Kate O'Neill. And with us today is the acclaimed author, Jill Ciment. Jill, welcome to the studio. How are you today?
I'm fine, and thank you for having me.
That is quite an accomplishment. To get anything made into the movies these days is a tough haul, but you've succeeded, and you could not have asked for two better stars for that movie.
Absolutely not. It was a miracle it ever got made. There you go.
It never ceases to amaze me how when the stars align, everything just happens.
They actually told me that, even up until the very last moment, like films get canceled the day before shooting starts. So, it wasn't like you were sort of with bated breath waiting to see if it actually happened. So I kind of found it a miracle.
I think it's awesome. It's just an amazing thing to have happen, and you got to be proud. You got to be happy about that.
Oh, very, very much so.
No doubt. Well, let's talk about this book. Now, all of this stuff could just be melodrama, but there's a real human behavior story going on. Describe for us what the book is to you.
Well, the book to me is the story of a woman who finds herself in a marriage with someone that she has loved for many, many years, but he is much, much older than her. And she has an opportunity to be sequestered on a jury, and she takes it as a sort of vacation from caregiving. And she ends up having an affair with another juror while they're sequestered in one of these econo lodges, which is where they sequester people. And having a mad love affair while you're on a jury does not help with your concentration. So it's really a battle, a sort of moral battle, to seek love at the same time that you're judging someone else. And so the story continues on, and you are always, as the reader, very tightly in my character's mind. So when a judge or more likely a lawyer objects to something that some evidence, my character never hears it, and therefore the reader never hears it. And so part of the story is about what is left out. Why is justice have a blindfold? And so that's part of the truth that she's seeking. And then the big moment, or what it might be the main moment at the end of the first part, is the story of how she and the other juror, F-17, who's an anatomy professor, how they find themselves on opposite sides of the verdict. And that is rather shocking to her because the whole time they never spoke about the trial, but she assumed that because she was, you know, intimately involved with him, she would know his thoughts. And that's like the first of, I hope, a series of surprises in the plot.
Well, I can say that if anybody had caught him, they'd have probably been thrown off the jury. So they had to keep this pretty quiet.
They had to keep it quiet, but, I did a lot of research, and there are a number of instances where jurors were having affairs during sequestration, and sometimes even deputies were having affairs with jurors.
Oh, my.
And there was a case that I used as the basis of this case. And in truth, what happened is when the client who was convicted found out about the affair, he tried for an appeal based on the affair, and it was actually thrown out of court.
Wow. That's amazing. Now, the thing that I see in here, there are a lot of books that you've written on a lot of different subjects, but they all come down to law or to court in some aspect.
That would be true.
Were you at one time working in law enforcement, or did you have someone in your family that influenced you?
Well, actually I do. I have a brother who, he's a much younger brother, and he started as a public defender in New York. So I ended up going to a number of his trials just to see, how he was doing. And they also had a lot of moot courts where they actually call in people from outside, and they perform a dramatic trial, and then juries go off and they deliberate, and this is a chance for the lawyers to see what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And none of these cases are real. So I sat through like quite a number of those, and that's when I started getting how interesting being on a jury is. And I've also sat on a number of juries. But the law is, it's a really dramatic vehicle, and that's why, it's the place where our morals and our ethics, come into question.
You think that by reading this book, you can feel a sense of why fours?
Why fours?
Yeah, like why did this happen and for what reason?
Here's what I learned from my brother, and we talked a lot about the law. No one finds out the truth in a trial. I mean, it's never going to be a clear. I mean, obviously there are probably some that are clear cut, but there's always extenuating circumstances, and there's so many things. And I wanted to get the kind of ambiguous state that you leave, even when you serve as a juror. It's never like you walk off completely convinced of your verdict, because you're not really being asked to describe whether a person is guilty or innocent. You're asking to see if it's been proven by the lawyers, and that's a very different thing. So I think in many cases people have felt that someone might be guilty, but they have to still vote non-guilty. And I think that's a case in the trial that I was trying to present.
With the judgment of the jurors, do you feel that jurors might tend to say, okay, whatever, just not to have to hang the jury?
I think it's a moment in a person's life. If you ever have an opportunity to do it, it is amazing. Where, I think most, you know, I think people really rise to the occasion. I think that people try to take this deeply seriously. I read a lot of memoirs of jurors and a lot of interviews with people like the George Zimmerman case, which was a really difficult case, okay, in the sense that, you know, a lot of people thought he was guilty, but they felt that the actual circumstances didn't allow them to say that.
Hmm.
And then there's peer pressure, and there's no question that when you get into a room, the stronger personalities sway and determine the conversation. So I think there's a lot of things, but I do believe that people, for the most part, rise to the occasion. It's an extraordinary thing. It's, there's only a couple things in this world. It's voting and serving as a juror, where you really get to be a civic person.
How do you feel that the characters were able to resolve their differences in a relatable fashion?
Well, I mean, what happens in the book is that my character's husband gets sick, and they sort of break up. Once they find out that they are on opposite sides of the jury, it's very hard for them to go on with the affair. And she's married, he is not, so she goes home. And, a series of other complications come into the life between her and her husband. And I think that the way the relationships resolve is because there are, bigger tragedies than not agreeing on a verdict.
So it's a matter of agree to disagree and move
Yes,
forward. I can
absolutely.
appreciate that. Do you feel like there will be a sequel to this book?
No, I'm not a sequel writer. I'm in the middle of another book. It's no, I think the book, is it's over, and it's not like I would read. Well, you know what? Who knows? Maybe there will be a sequel. Right now, there isn't.
Maybe another movie deal.
There you go.
That's the way to look at that. Jill, how long have you been writing?
I was a visual artist, and I, I started writing after I decided to give up visual art because of many things, but primarily I was a conceptual artist. And I wanted to do a kind of art that had a longer tradition, and I was always attracted to literature. So I started writing in my mid 20s. And, I published my first book in my early 30s, and I've been writing ever since. It started off as a very painful endeavor, as it does for most young writers, where it's more painful to write than not write, and you force yourself to do it, and you go through incredible inner drama. And eventually, what happens is you either come to love it or you stop writing. And I somehow came to love it, so I've continued on.
What do you feel was your biggest drive?
I think what happens is it's book by book, but I think, I really believe in storytelling. I mean, I think incredible language is really important. I think precision in language is important, but I also think story is really important. And so, if I have a story to tell, I kind of can't let it go until it's been told. So I've been doing it on a book by book basis, but usually my driving force is, I feel deeply that this story has something to say to a reader. I mean, it was once described to me that it was described by Tolstoy this way, that you have a deep emotion in your life. You fall in love, you lose someone you love, whatever the deep emotion is. And then what you do is you try to create a form, in my case, a novel, that will evoke that emotion in the reader. And it's a conversation that travels through an art form. And evoking, emotion in another person is really what the goal is. So first I have to be deeply moved enough to be able to create something that might later